The gunshot echoed through the canyon like thunder, sending a flock of startled ravens into the azure Wyoming sky as Elijah Morgan fired a final warning shot over the head of the retreating cattle rustler. The year was 1872, and the untamed wilderness of the Dakota Territory was no place for the weak or the lawless, a truth Elijah had learned through years of hard living and harder losses.
Bah, bah.
Did you get him? 10-year-old Thomas came racing around the barn, his younger sister Sarah, just 7, trailing behind him with her golden braids bouncing against her shoulders. Elijah lowered his rifle and knelt down to catch his daughter as she flung herself into his arms. No need to get him, darlin'. Just needed to remind him that Morgan land ain't for thievin'. He tousled Thomas's sandy hair, so like his mother's had been. You two should be doing your chores, not chasing after trouble. We finished feeding the chickens, Thomas protested, his chin jutting out in that stubborn way that was pure Catherine. The thought of his late wife sent a familiar pang through Elijah's chest, a wound that 2 years hadn't healed. Well then, time for your reading lessons, Elijah said, guiding the children back toward the cabin. It was a solid structure, built with his own hands 5 years ago when he and Catherine had claimed this plot of land along the Bighorn River. They had such dreams then, dreams that had shattered beneath the wheels of an overturned wagon on a rain-slicked mountain pass. The inside of the cabin was clean but sparse. Elijah did his best, but there was always something missing, the woman's touch that had made this place a home. He settled the children at the rough-hewn table with their primers while he prepared a simple stew for supper. "Pa, when's Mrs. Wilson coming again?" Sarah asked, her small fingers tracing the letters in her book. "Tomorrow," Elijah replied, not looking up from the potatoes he was cutting. "She'll stay with you while I ride to town." Mrs. Wilson was the widow from the neighboring farm who came twice a week to help with the children. She was a kind woman, but elderly and couldn't manage much beyond watching the children and some light mending. "Can't we come to town with you?" Thomas pleaded. "I want to see if the new rifles came in at Mr. Harper's store." "Not this time," Elijah said firmly. "I've got business to attend to." The business was something he hadn't told the children about yet. After months of consideration and encouragement from the town's preacher, Elijah had finally placed an advertisement in a St. Louis newspaper for a mail-order bride. His letter had been answered by a woman named Faith Adams, who described herself as 26, unmarried, and willing to travel west to start a new life. They had exchanged several letters, and she was due to arrive on tomorrow's stagecoach. Elijah hadn't decided when to tell the children. How did a man explain to his son and daughter that he was bringing home a stranger to take their mother's place? Not that anyone could ever truly replace Catherine in his heart, but the children needed a mother's care, and he needed. Well, he wasn't entirely sure what he needed anymore. That night, after the children were asleep, Elijah sat on the porch with his pipe, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. The ranch was quiet save for the occasional lowing of cattle and the distant howl of a coyote. It was in these quiet moments that Catherine's absence felt most acute. "Am I doing the right thing, Kate?" he whispered to the night air. There was no answer but the rustling of the wind through the pine trees. Morning came with a burst of golden sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. Elijah rose before dawn, as was his habit, to tend to the livestock before the children awoke. By the time Thomas and Sarah came stumbling sleepily from their room, he had breakfast on the table: biscuits, bacon, and strong coffee for himself, milk for the children. "Now listen," he said as they ate. "Mrs. Wilson will be here soon, and I'll be gone most of the day. I expect you both to mind her and finish your chores." "Yes, Pa," they chorused, exchanging glances that suggested they were already planning some mischief. "And Thomas," Elijah added, fixing his son with a stern look, "no taking your sister up to Lookout Ridge again. It's too dangerous." Thomas had the grace to look abashed. "Yes, sir." After Mrs. Wilson arrived, a plump, Gray-haired woman with spectacles perched on her nose. Elijah saddled his best horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Buck, and set off for the town of Clearwater, some 10 miles distant. The ride gave him time to think, to prepare himself for meeting Faith Adams face to face. What if she took one look at his weathered face, his calloused hands, his simple ranch, and decided to return east on the next stage? What if the children resented her? What if he couldn't open his heart to her? Clearwater was a growing town, boasting a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a church, and even a schoolhouse built the previous year. As Elijah rode down the main street, he nodded to familiar faces: the blacksmith, the banker, the sheriff sitting outside his office whittling a piece of wood. He tied Buck outside Harper's General Store and went inside to collect supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and a bolt of blue calico fabric he thought Faith might appreciate. Then he headed to the hotel to secure a room for her. It seemed improper to bring her directly to the ranch before they were married. The stagecoach was due at noon, and Elijah found himself pacing outside the station as the hour approached. He had dressed in his best clothes, which weren't much, just a clean shirt and the coat he wore to church on Sundays, and had even trimmed his beard that morning. The sound of hooves and wheels announced the stage's arrival before it came into view. Elijah felt his heart pounding as the dust-covered coach pulled up to the station. The driver set the brake and climbed down to open the door. First came an elderly couple, then a traveling salesman with a case of samples. And finally, a young woman in a dove-gray traveling suit, her face half hidden by a modest bonnet. Miss Adams. Elijah stepped forward, removing his hat. The woman looked up, and Elijah found himself gazing into eyes the color of summer cornflowers. Her face was heart-shaped, with delicate features and full lips that curved into a hesitant smile. "Mr. Morgan?" Her voice was soft but clear, with a slight Eastern accent. "Yes, madam." He extended a hand to help her down from the coach. "Welcome to Clearwater." Up close, he could see that Faith Adams was a pretty woman, though not in the flashy way of the girls who worked at the Silver Dollar Saloon. There was a quietness to her beauty, a sense of dignity in the way she held herself despite the obvious fatigue of her journey. "Thank you," she said, accepting his hand and stepping down carefully. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "Likewise." Elijah felt suddenly awkward, unsure what to say to this woman who had agreed to marry him based on a few letters. "Let me get your luggage." With the help of the stage driver, he retrieved her trunk and a carpet bag. "I've taken a room for you at the hotel," he explained as they walked down the street. "I thought you might want to rest after your journey before coming out to the ranch." Faith nodded, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. "That's very considerate. I would appreciate a chance to freshen up." At the hotel, Elijah arranged for her bags to be taken up to her room, then escorted her to the small dining room. "Perhaps we could have some lunch?" "You must be hungry after your journey." "That would be lovely." Faith removed her bonnet, revealing hair the color of honey, neatly pinned up in a practical style. "I must admit, the food on the stagecoach route was rather adventurous." That small jest broke some of the tension between them, and Elijah found himself smiling. The hotel's cook is a Frenchman who came west for the gold rush and stayed for the lack of competition. His food is the best for 100 miles. Over a meal of beef stew and fresh bread, they began the awkward process of getting to know each other beyond what they had shared in their letters. "How were your travels?" Elijah asked. "Long," Faith admitted with a small smile. "But educational. I've never been west of the Mississippi before. The landscape is so different from Massachusetts, beautiful, but in a wilder way." "It can be harsh," Elijah warned. "Winters are long, and summers can be dry. It's not an easy life." "I didn't come west expecting an easy life, Mr. Morgan," Faith replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I came seeking purpose." There was something in her eyes, a shadow of old pain that resonated with Elijah's own grief. He found himself wondering what had driven this well-spoken Eastern woman to answer an advertisement for a mail-order bride. "May I ask about your children?" Faith inquired, changing the subject. "You mentioned in your letters that you have a son and daughter?" Elijah's expression softened. "Thomas is 10.
He's a good boy, though headstrong. Takes after his mother that way.
Sarah is 7, sweet as sugar most days, but she can be stubborn too when she sets her mind to something." "They sound wonderful," Faith said, and Elijah could see genuine warmth in her eyes. "I look forward to meeting them." "They don't know about you yet," Elijah admitted. "I wasn't sure how to tell them after their mother died." "I understand," Faith said gently. "Children need time to adjust to changes. Perhaps we could tell them together?" Elijah nodded, grateful for her understanding. "I was thinking we might ride out to the ranch tomorrow, if you're rested enough. You could meet the children, see the place. And if," he hesitated, "if you find it's not to your liking, the stage goes back east on Friday." Faith regarded him thoughtfully. "That seems fair. Though I didn't travel all this way with the intention of turning back at the first difficulty." They finished their meal, and Elijah escorted Faith back to her room, agreeing to meet her for breakfast the following morning. As he rode back to the ranch that evening, Elijah found himself conflicted. Faith Adams seemed a decent, sensible woman, and he had no doubt she would be a good influence on the children. But there had been no spark, no immediate connection like he'd felt the first time he'd laid eyes on Catherine all those years ago. "Is it fair to marry her when I can't give her my whole heart?" he asked Buck as they rode through the gathering dusk. The horse's ears flicked back at the sound of his voice but offered no answer. When he arrived home, the children were full of questions about his day in town, but Elijah put them off, saying only that he had a surprise for them tomorrow. That night, he lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine Faith in this house, in his life, in his bed. Morning brought no clear answers, but it did bring the necessity of action. After ensuring the children were presentable and the house was as clean as a bachelor's home with 2 active children could be, Elijah rode back to town to collect Faith. She was waiting for him at the hotel, dressed in a practical blue traveling dress, her hair once again neatly pinned beneath a simple bonnet. Her trunk and carpet bag were packed and ready. "I've hired a wagon for us," Elijah explained as he helped load her luggage. "It's a bit more comfortable for the journey than riding double on Buck." The ride to the ranch took the better part of 2 hours. At first, they traveled in awkward silence, but gradually, Faith began to ask questions about the land, the animals, the seasons. Elijah found himself impressed by her practical inquiries and her evident interest in learning about ranch life. "There it is," he said finally as they crested a hill that overlooked the Morgan Ranch. Below them, the cabin sat nestled among pine trees, with a barn and corral nearby, a creek winding behind the property, and the pastures stretching beyond. It wasn't a large spread by Wyoming standards, but it was good land, with water and grass for the cattle and shelter from the worst of the winter storms. Faith shaded her eyes against the sun, taking in the view. "It's beautiful," she said softly, and Elijah felt a surge of pride. As they approached the cabin, the door flew open, and Thomas and Sarah burst out, curious about the wagon and the stranger accompanying their father. "Children," Elijah called as he brought the wagon to a halt, "I want you to meet Miss Adams. She's come a long way to visit us." Faith smiled at the children, who were regarding her with undisguised curiosity.
"Hello, Thomas."
"Hello, Sarah. Your father has told me so much about you. Are you going to be our new mother?" Sarah asked bluntly, causing Elijah to choke slightly. Faith didn't flinch at the direct question. "That depends on a few things," she said honestly. "I need to get to know you both, and you need to get to know me, and your father and I need to decide if we suit each other. Would that be all right with you?" Sarah considered this, her small face serious. "Can you make apple pie?" Our ma used to make the best apple pie. I can make apple pie, Faith confirmed, though I can't promise it will be as good as your mother's. No one could make pie like Ma, Thomas said, a touch defiantly. But I guess you could try. Elijah gave his son a warning look, but Faith simply nodded. That seems fair. I would never try to replace your mother, Thomas. But perhaps we could be friends. The boy shrugged, non-committal, but Elijah could see he was at least willing to consider the idea. The next few days fell into an unexpected pattern. Faith settled into the small room off the kitchen that had once been a pantry but had been hastily converted to a bedroom for her. She rose early each morning to help with breakfast, spent the days learning the routine of the ranch, and in the evenings, she read to the children or taught Sarah to sew while Thomas pretended not to be interested. Elijah watched with growing respect as Faith adapted to ranch life without complaint. She wasn't afraid of hard work. He'd seen her help with the washing, tend the vegetable garden, and even assist with a difficult calving when one of the cows went into labor unexpectedly. With the children, she was patient but firm. She didn't tolerate Thomas's occasional rudeness, but she also didn't punish him for it, instead engaging him in conversation until he forgot to maintain his hostility. With Sarah, she was gentle, answering the girl's endless questions and teaching her practical skills that Catherine had never had the chance to pass on. A week after Faith's arrival, Elijah found her sitting on the porch in the evening, darning one of Thomas's socks. The setting sun cast a golden glow over her face, highlighting the delicate curve of her cheek and the wisp of honey-colored hair that had escaped her usually neat bun. "May I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Of course," Faith said, making room for him on the bench. "It's your porch, after all." Elijah settled beside her, watching as her needle flashed in and out of the sock with practiced ease. "You've been a godsend with the children," he said after a moment. "They've changed just in the week you've been here." Thomas actually volunteered to help with the dishes last night. Faith smiled, her eyes still on her work. "They're wonderful children. You've done a remarkable job raising them on your own." "Not as good as I should have," Elijah admitted. "There's so much they need that I can't give them." "You give them love and security," Faith countered. "That's more important than anything else." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the porch swing and the distant lowing of cattle. "Why did you answer my advertisement?" Elijah asked suddenly. It was a question that had been troubling him. "A woman like you, educated, refined, surely you had other prospects back east?" Faith's hands stilled, and for a moment, Elijah thought she wouldn't answer. When she did, her voice was quiet. "I was engaged once, to a man from a good Boston family. We were to be married right after the war, but he came back. Changed. The things he'd seen, the things he'd done, they haunted him. He started drinking, and when he drank, he became someone else entirely." She took a deep breath. "One night, he struck me." The next day, full of remorse, he put his service revolver to his head. "Faith, I'm so sorry," Elijah said, shocked by her story. She shook her head. "After that, I became something of a pariah in Boston society. The whispers, the pitying looks, I couldn't bear it. I took a position as a schoolteacher in a small town, but even there, my past followed me. When I saw your advertisement..." She looked up at him, her blue eyes clear and direct. "I saw a chance for a fresh start, in a place where no one knew my history, where I might be judged for who I am rather than for a tragedy in my past." Elijah felt a surge of admiration for this woman who had endured so much, yet remained unbowed. "Thank you for telling me," he said simply. "And for what it's worth, I think you're the bravest person I've ever met." Faith's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I think that's the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." Something shifted between them in that moment, not quite a spark, but a warming, like the first hints of spring after a long winter. The next day, Elijah made a decision. "I'd like to take you into town," he told Faith over breakfast. "The Founders' Day Festival is this Saturday. There'll be a dance and games for the children. It would be a good opportunity for you to meet some of the other families." "I'd like that," Faith said, her eyes lighting up. "It's been a long time since I attended a dance." "Can we really go, Pa?" Sarah asked excitedly. "Will there be candy apples like last year?" "I expect so," Elijah said, smiling at his daughter's enthusiasm. "And a shooting contest," he added for Thomas's benefit, knowing his son's interest in marksmanship. Thomas tried to maintain his aloof demeanor, but Elijah could see the excitement in his eyes. "Will you enter the contest, Pa?" "I might," Elijah said, though in truth, he hadn't participated in such events since Catherine's death. They had reminded him too much of happier times. Saturday dawned clear and warm, a perfect day for the festival. Faith had spent the previous evening altering one of her dresses for the occasion, and when she emerged from her room that morning, Elijah felt his breath catch. The dress was a simple blue calico, but she had added a white collar and cuffs that framed her face and slim wrists beautifully. "You look lovely," he said, the words escaping before he could consider them. A blush colored Faith's cheeks. "Thank you. It's nothing fancy, but it's perfect," Elijah assured her. The ride to town was filled with the children's excited chatter. Even Thomas had abandoned his pretense of indifference, peppering Elijah with questions about the shooting contest and whether they might see any Indians at the festival. Clearwater was transformed for the occasion. Bunting decorated the main street, and stalls had been set up selling everything from food to handcrafted goods. A platform had been erected in the center of town for dancing, and already a fiddler was tuning up. As they walked through the crowds, Elijah introduced Faith to the townspeople, the blacksmith and his wife, the preacher, the schoolteacher Miss Halliday, and the sheriff. "So you're the Eastern lady who answered Elijah's advertisement," the sheriff said, eyeing Faith with frank curiosity. "Settling in all right, are you?" "Very well, thank you," Faith replied with quiet dignity. "The Morgan family has been most welcoming. She made us a real apple pie," Sarah piped up. "It wasn't exactly like Ma's, but it was mighty good." The sheriff chuckled. "High praise indeed from Miss Sarah. She's quite the food critic, aren't you, little lady?" Sarah beamed at the attention, while Thomas shifted impatiently. "Pa, they're starting to set up for the shooting contest," he said, pointing to where several men were placing targets at the edge of town. "Why don't you take the children to watch the preparations?" Faith suggested to Elijah. "I spotted a fabric stall I'd like to visit. I'll join you shortly." Elijah hesitated, reluctant to leave her alone, but Faith smiled reassuringly. "I'll be perfectly fine. Go enjoy the contest with your children." As the day progressed, Elijah found himself watching Faith as she moved through the festival. She seemed to fit in naturally, chatting with the other women, admiring the handicrafts, and joining in the applause when the school children performed a recitation. The townsfolk appeared to accept her readily, drawn by her genuine interest in their lives and her obvious affection for Thomas and Sarah. The shooting contest was won by a rancher from the next valley, though Elijah placed respectably, earning a proud whoop from Thomas. As the afternoon waned, the fiddler struck up a livelier tune, and couples began to gather for dancing. "Would you care to dance, Miss Adams?" Elijah found himself asking as the music swirled around them. Faith looked surprised but pleased. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Morgan." It had been years since Elijah had danced, and he was sure his steps were rusty, but Faith followed his lead gracefully. As they moved together, he became acutely aware of her hand in his, the scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "You're a better dancer than you let on," she said as he guided her through a turn. "It's all in having the right partner," he replied, surprising himself with the ease of the compliment. They danced 3 more dances before Thomas complained of hunger, and they made their way to the food stalls. The children gorged themselves on candy apples and gingerbread while Elijah and Faith shared a plate of fried chicken and cornbread. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the festivities. The mood grew more boisterous as some of the men indulged in whiskey from the saloon, and Elijah noticed Faith growing tense as a particularly rowdy group of cowboys staggered past. "Perhaps it's time we headed home," he suggested, recognizing her discomfort. "The children have had a full day." Faith nodded gratefully. "Yes, I think that would be best." As they gathered their things and headed for the wagon, Elijah was stopped by the sheriff. "Got a moment, Morgan?" the lawman asked, drawing him aside. "What is it, Sheriff?" Elijah asked, keeping an eye on Faith and the children as they waited by the wagon. "Just wanted to give you a warning. Jeb Carlson's been released from Territorial Prison. Word is he's headed this way." Elijah felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Jeb Carlson had been the leader of the gang that had attacked their wagon train 2 years ago, the attack that had led to Catherine's death. Elijah's testimony had helped send the man to prison, but apparently not for long enough. "When?" Elijah asked tersely. "Last week. Might be nothing to worry about, he could just be passing through. But thought you should know, given the history." "I appreciate the warning," Elijah said, his mind already racing ahead to what precautions he would need to take. The journey home was subdued, the children drowsy from their day of excitement, Faith quiet beside him. It wasn't until the children were asleep and they were alone on the porch that Elijah shared the sheriff's news. "This man, he was responsible for your wife's death?" Faith asked, her face pale in the moonlight. "He led the attack on our wagon train," Elijah confirmed. "We were traveling with a group bringing supplies to Fort Laramie. Carlson and his gang thought we were carrying Army payroll. When they discovered we weren't, they took what valuables they could find and set fire to the wagons. Catherine was trapped." He couldn't continue, the memory still too painful. Faith's hand found his in the darkness, her touch gentle but grounding. "What will you do?" she asked. "Be vigilant. Make sure the children are never alone. Keep my rifle loaded." Elijah sighed heavily. "And pray that Carlson has enough sense to stay away from these parts." Faith was silent for a long moment. "Should I return to town? If my presence here puts the children at risk—" "No," Elijah said firmly. "The children are safer with you here. And he hesitated then admitted, "I would feel better knowing you were with them if I need to deal with Carlson." The days following the festival were tense. Elijah found himself scanning the horizon frequently, starting at unexpected sounds, checking and rechecking his rifle. He instructed Thomas and Sarah to stay close to the house and made sure Faith knew how to use the shotgun he kept above the door. Despite the threat hanging over them, life on the ranch continued. The cattle needed tending, the garden required weeding, meals had to be prepared. Faith threw herself into these tasks with renewed determination, as if by maintaining normalcy, she could ward off danger. One evening, about a week after the festival, Elijah returned from checking the herd to find Faith and the children gathered around the table, their heads bent over what appeared to be a scrapbook. "What's this?" he asked, setting his hat on the peg by the door. "Miss Faith is helping us make a memory book for Ma," Sarah explained, looking up with a smile that tugged at Elijah's heart. "We're putting in the things we remember about her and the stories you told us." Elijah moved closer, looking over their shoulders at the pages they had created. There were simple drawings: Catherine baking, Catherine reading to the children, Catherine riding her horse, and beneath each, in Faith's neat handwriting, the children's memories. "It was Thomas's idea," Faith said softly. "He mentioned that he was afraid of forgetting her face, her voice. I thought this might help them hold on to their memories." Elijah felt a lump form in his throat. He had been so consumed with his own grief that he hadn't fully considered how the children were processing their loss. Yet here was Faith, a woman who had never even met Catherine, helping his children preserve her memory. "It's a wonderful idea," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Thank you. Faith met his gaze, her eyes warm with understanding. Your late wife will always be part of their lives, part of this family. I would never want to change that. In that moment, Elijah realized that what he felt for Faith was no longer just gratitude or admiration. Something deeper had taken root, something that frightened him with its intensity. He had thought his heart closed off after Catherine's death, but somehow, this quiet, strong woman had found a way past his defenses. The peaceful evening was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Elijah moved to the window, his hand automatically reaching for his rifle. Take the children to the back room, he instructed Faith, his voice taut with tension. Bar the door, and don't come out until I call for you. Faith didn't waste time with questions. She gathered the children, who had gone pale with fear, and hurried them to the bedroom, casting one worried glance back at Elijah before closing the door. Elijah positioned himself by the front window, rifle ready, as 3 riders approached the cabin. In the fading light, he could make out Jeb Carlson's burly figure in the lead. The outlaw had aged in prison, his once dark hair now streaked with gray, but his brutish features were unmistakable. Morgan, Carlson called, reining in his horse's safe distance from the house. Come out and face me like a man. Elijah considered his options. He could probably pick off at least one of the men from his position, but that would leave the other 2, and they were likely to return fire. With the children in the house, he couldn't risk a shootout. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the porch, his rifle held ready, but not aimed directly at the men. You're trespassing on my land, Carlson. The outlaw sneered, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Figured I'd pay you a visit, seeing as your testimony put me away for 2 years. 2 years in territorial prison ain't a pleasant stay. You're lucky it wasn't a hanging offense, Elijah replied coldly. Now state your business and get off my property. My business. Carlson's laugh was ugly. My business is settling scores, Morgan. You cost me 2 years of my life. I figure that deserves some compensation. The only thing you deserve is a pine box, Elijah said. But I'm giving you the chance to ride away. Take it while you still can. One of Carlson's companions, a weaselly man with a pockmarked face, leaned forward in his saddle. Word in town is you got yourself a new woman, Morgan. Eastern lady. Pretty, they say. A cold dread settled in Elijah's stomach. This is between you and me, Carlson. Leave my family out of it. Family? Carlson mocked. I heard your wife died in that fire.
Shame about that.
Accidents happen, don't they? His hand moved to his gun. Maybe more accidents are coming your way. Before Carlson could draw, the blast of a shotgun tore through the evening air. The outlaw's horse reared in panic, nearly unseating its rider, as buckshot peppered the ground at its feet. Faith stood in the doorway behind Elijah, the shotgun steady in her hands. The next shot won't miss, she said, her voice remarkably calm. Leave now, or I'll make sure you never threaten this family again. Carlson stared at her in shock, clearly not expecting this development. His companions were already wheeling their horses around, unwilling to face the business end of a shotgun. This ain't over, Morgan, Carlson spat, but he too was backing his horse away. You best watch your back. And you best be out of the territory by sunrise, Elijah replied. Sheriff's already been notified that you're in the area. I reckon he'd be mighty pleased to send you back to prison, or to the gallows this time. They watched as the 3 men rode away, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Only when they were out of sight did Elijah lower his rifle and turn to Faith. I thought I told you to stay in the back room with the children, he said, though there was no anger in his voice, only concern. The children are safe, Faith assured him. I barred the door, as you said, but I couldn't let you face those men alone. She lowered the shotgun, her hands trembling slightly now that the danger had passed. I've seen what men like that are capable of. I couldn't bear it if, she broke off, blinking rapidly. Elijah took the shotgun from her hands and set it aside, then did what he had been wanting to do for days. He pulled her into his arms. Faith came willingly, her body fitting against his, as if she belonged there. "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever seen," he murmured into her hair. "But I'm grateful all the same." Faith looked up at him, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "I couldn't lose you. Not when I've just found you." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Elijah lifted a hand to her cheek, tracing the delicate line of her jaw with calloused fingers. "Faith Adams, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known." He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away, if she wished. But Faith rose on her tiptoes to meet him, her lips soft and yielding beneath his. The kiss was gentle at first, a tentative exploration, but it deepened as the barriers between them crumbled, weeks of growing feelings crystallizing in this moment of connection. A small voice from the hallway broke them apart.
"Pa?"
"Miss Faith, are the bad men gone?" Sarah stood in the doorway to the back room, her small face pinched with worry. Behind her, Thomas peered out, trying to appear brave, but unable to hide his fear. "Yes, darlin'," Elijah assured her, keeping one arm around Faith's waist. "The bad men are gone, and they won't be coming back." "Did you shoot them?" Thomas asked, his eyes wide. "No," Faith said firmly. "No one was hurt. They just needed to be reminded that this family is protected." The children came fully into the room, Sarah rushing to wrap her arms around her father's legs, while Thomas approached more cautiously. "You are very brave, Miss Faith," the boy said with newfound respect. "I saw you through the window. You weren't scared at all." Faith smiled, reaching out to smooth his tousled hair. "I was terrified, Thomas. But sometimes being brave isn't about not being scared, it's about doing what needs to be done despite your fear." Thomas considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Like Pa when he goes after wolves that threaten the cattle." "Exactly like that," Faith agreed. That night, after the children were asleep, Elijah and Faith sat on the porch, closer than they had ever sat before, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "I'll ride into town tomorrow," Elijah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Speak to the sheriff about Carlson." "Do you think they'll come back?" Faith asked. "No," Elijah said confidently. "Carlson's a bully. He preys on the weak and unprepared. He wasn't expecting resistance, especially not from you." He chuckled softly. "The look on his face when you appeared with that shotgun, I'll treasure that memory." Faith smiled, but it faded quickly. "Elijah, there's something I need to tell you about why I came west." "You already told me," he reminded her. "About your fiancé, the tragedy." "Yes, but there's more." Faith straightened, turning to face him. "After James died, my fiancé, I discovered I was with child." Elijah stilled, but his arm remained around her, his support unwavering. "What happened?" "I lost the baby," Faith said softly. "The doctor said it was the stress, the shock of everything that had happened. Afterward, I was told I might never be able to have children of my own." She looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. "I should have told you before. If you want to reconsider." "Faith," Elijah interrupted gently, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his gaze. "Nothing you've told me changes how I feel about you. And as for children, I already have 2 wonderful ones who need a mother's love. If God blesses us with more, that would be a gift. If not, our family will still be complete." Tears spilled from Faith's eyes, and Elijah brushed them away with his thumb. "I never thought I could feel this way again," he admitted. "After Catherine died, I was certain that part of me was gone forever. But you've brought light back into this home, into my life. I love you, Faith Adams." "And I love you, Elijah Morgan," she whispered, the words a promise in the quiet night. The following Sunday, they were married in the small white church in Clearwater. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with Thomas standing proudly as his father's best man and Sarah serving as flower girl, scattering wildflower petals before the bride. Faith wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had ordered from a catalog and altered herself, with a crown of prairie roses in her honey-colored hair. Elijah, in a new suit purchased for the occasion, could hardly take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him. The townspeople filled the church, curious to see the culmination of this unusual courtship, but also genuinely happy for a man who had endured more than his share of sorrow. Even Mrs. Wilson, despite losing her position as the children's caretaker, dabbed happy tears from her eyes as the couple exchanged their vows. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared, beaming at the couple. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Morgan." As Elijah's lips met Faith's, sealing their union, he felt a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. The road ahead would not always be smooth. Life in the Wyoming Territory guaranteed that, but they would face whatever came together as a family. The wedding celebration continued at the town hall, with a feast contributed by the women of Clearwater and music provided by local fiddlers. Faith danced with Elijah, then with Thomas, who tried not to show how pleased he was when she praised his dancing, and finally with little Sarah, who twirled in delighted circles, her fancy new dress flaring around her. As the evening progressed, Elijah found a moment to pull his new wife aside. "Happy, Mrs. Morgan?" he asked, his voice tender. "More than I ever thought possible," Faith replied, her eyes shining. "I came west seeking a new beginning, but I found so much more. I found a home, a family, and a love I never expected. And we found the mother our children needed," Elijah said, watching as Thomas gallantly offered Sarah another dance, the siblings laughing together in a way he hadn't seen since before Catherine's death. "Look at them, you've worked miracles in such a short time." "Not miracles," Faith demurred. "Just love and patience. They're wonderful children, Elijah. You should be very proud." "I am," he assured her, "of them, and of my extraordinary wife." The return to the ranch that night was different from any previous journey. Now Faith rode beside Elijah as his wife, the children drowsing in the back of the wagon, surrounded by wedding gifts from the townsfolk. The stars seemed brighter somehow, the night air sweeter as they traveled to the place that was now truly home for all of them. In the months that followed, the Morgan Ranch flourished under the care of its expanded family. Faith proved to be not only a loving mother to Thomas and Sarah, but also a capable ranch wife, learning to ride, to tend livestock, to preserve food for the winter. She started a small school for the children of neighboring ranches, putting her teaching experience to good use. Thomas, no longer the sullen boy who had resented Faith's arrival, became her staunch defender and helper, proud to be the man of the house when Elijah was away. Sarah blossomed under Faith's guidance, developing a talent for drawing that no one had suspected and becoming quite the little horsewoman under her brother's tutelage. As for Elijah, he found himself falling more deeply in love with his wife with each passing day. The shadow of Catherine remained, but no longer as a barrier to happiness, rather, as part of the tapestry of their family history, honored and remembered with love. Winter came to the Wyoming Territory with a fury that Faith, despite Elijah's warnings, had not fully anticipated. Blizzards raged for days, confining the family to the cabin, the world outside reduced to a swirling whiteness broken only by the dark shapes of the barn and corral. During one such storm, as wind howled around the eaves and snow piled against the windows, Faith sat by the fire, reading to the children from Little Women. Elijah, returning from checking on the livestock in the barn, paused in the doorway, struck by the tableau before him, his children safe and warm, his wife's gentle voice filling the room with stories of the March family's adventures. Faith looked up, sensing his presence, and smiled that warm, radiant smile that never failed to stir his heart. "Come join us," she invited, patting the space beside her. "Thomas is quite taken with Joe's literary ambitions." "She's just like you, Miss Faith," Sarah said, snuggling closer to her stepmother. "Smart and brave and not afraid to speak her mind." Elijah hung up his coat and settled beside his family, contentment washing over him. This was what he had hoped for when he'd placed that advertisement so many months ago, not just help with the children, not just a woman to keep house, but a true partner, someone to share the joys and burdens of life on the frontier. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, the land awakening from its winter slumber with bursts of wildflowers and the tender green of new grass. With it came news that thrilled the entire family. Faith was expecting a child. "Are you sure?" Elijah asked, his voice hushed with wonder as she shared the news with him one evening after the children were asleep. "The doctor in town confirmed it yesterday," Faith said, her face glowing with happiness. "He says the baby should arrive in late October." Elijah gathered her in his arms, careful despite her protests that she wasn't fragile. "Faith Morgan, you continue to amaze me. A child of our own," his voice broke with emotion. "A sibling for Thomas and Sarah," Faith corrected gently. "Another piece of our family puzzle." The children's reaction to the news was everything they could have hoped for. Sarah was ecstatic at the prospect of a baby to help care for, while Thomas, after a moment of consideration, declared that a brother would be acceptable, though he wasn't sure what they'd do with another sister. As Faith's pregnancy progressed, the entire family worked to prepare for the new arrival. Elijah built a cradle from pine wood, carefully sanding it smooth and allowing Sarah to paint small flowers along the sides. Thomas helped expand the vegetable garden, solemnly informing Faith that she needed to eat well for the baby's sake. The neighboring women organized a quilting bee, creating a beautiful blanket of blue and yellow squares for the newest Morgan. Summer passed in a haze of heat and hard work, the ranch demanding constant attention. Despite her advancing pregnancy, Faith insisted on doing her share, though she reluctantly agreed to rest during the hottest part of the day and allowed the children to take over more of the household duties. As autumn painted the surrounding hills with gold and crimson, Faith's time drew near. Elijah arranged for Mrs. Wilson to stay at the ranch in case Faith went into labor while he was away, and he kept the wagon ready at all times in case they needed to make a swift journey to town for the doctor. The baby, however, had plans of its own. On a crisp October morning, as Elijah was out checking the herd in the north pasture, Faith's water broke. Thomas, showing a maturity beyond his 11 years, immediately sent Sarah to the neighboring ranch for help while he helped Faith to bed and put water on to boil, just as he'd heard the adults discuss. By the time Elijah returned, alerted by a breathless Sarah and the neighbor's son, Faith was in the midst of labor, attended by the experienced wife of a nearby rancher. The hours that followed were a blur of worry and anticipation for Elijah, as he alternated between comforting his wife through her contractions and keeping the children occupied and calm. Just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land, a new cry joined the sounds of the ranch, the lusty wail of a healthy baby girl. Elijah, allowed into the bedroom at last, found Faith propped up on pillows, her face weary but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your daughter," she invited, her voice soft with wonder. Elijah approached with reverent steps, overwhelmed by the sight of his wife and newborn child. The baby was tiny but perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that, when they briefly opened, showed hints of Faith's cornflower blue. "She's beautiful," he whispered, gently touching the infant's cheek. "Just like her mother." "What shall we name her?" Faith asked, looking up at him with love. Elijah hesitated only a moment. "Elizabeth," he suggested. "After your mother." Elizabeth Catherine Morgan. Tears welled in Faith's eyes at his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect. Elizabeth Catherine it is." When Thomas and Sarah were allowed in to meet their new sister, their reactions cemented the family bond that had been growing since Faith's arrival. Thomas approached cautiously, his expression softening as the baby wrapped her tiny hand around his finger. Sarah clambered onto the bed, full of questions about when Elizabeth would be big enough to play with dolls and ride horses. Not for quite some time, Faith laughed, making room for Sarah beside her. But you'll be a wonderful big sister, teaching her all sorts of things. I'll protect her, Thomas promised solemnly. That's what big brothers do. As Elijah looked at his expanded family, his strong, compassionate wife, his son growing into a fine young man, his daughter with her mother's spirit, and now this new life, this precious gift, he felt a completeness he had thought forever lost to him after Catherine's death. Later that night, with the children finally asleep and the baby nestled in her cradle beside their bed, Elijah sat on the edge of the mattress, watching Faith as she drifted towards sleep. "Thank you," he said simply, taking her hand in his. Faith's eyes opened, questioning. "For what?" "For answering my advertisement. For taking a chance on a widower with 2 children. For bringing love back into this house." Elijah's voice was husky with emotion. "For giving me a reason to look forward to tomorrow again." Faith squeezed his hand, her smile tender in the lamplight. "I should be thanking you. You gave me a home when I had none, a family when I thought I would never have children, and love when I believed that part of my life was over." "I love you, Faith Morgan," Elijah said, bending to kiss her forehead. "And I love you, Elijah Morgan," she replied, her eyes already closing with exhaustion. "All of you past, present, and future." As his wife and infant daughter slept, Elijah stepped out onto the porch for a moment, gazing up at the vast Wyoming sky, where stars glittered like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, the dangers and sorrows of the past receding like shadows before dawn. 2 years ago, he had thought his life effectively over, his heart buried with Catherine. Now, against all odds, he had been given a second chance at happiness, a new beginning built not on forgetting the past, but on embracing it as part of the journey that had led him here. In the distance, a coyote howled, its cry echoing across the valley before fading into silence. Elijah took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, feeling a profound gratitude for this moment, this life. "Thank you," he whispered to the night, to the God who had guided his steps, to the mysterious workings of fate that had brought Faith Adams to his door. Then he turned and went back inside, to the warmth of his home and the embrace of his family, his heart full to overflowing with love and hope for the future that stretched before them like an endless frontier, waiting to be explored together.